A billionaire can walk into any store, any neighborhood, any building without a single question asked. But a decorated black Marine veteran can't even water his own lawn without someone calling the police on him for suspicious behavior. What you're about to witness isn't just another story about racism in America. It's a raw, unfiltered look at how prejudice destroys lives, how assumptions can shatter families, and how one mother's split-second judgment nearly cost her everything she held dear. This is the story of Margaret Chen, a successful real estate mogul worth over $50 million, who made one phone call that would expose the ugly truth about racial bias in wealthy neighborhoods. A phone call that would turn her son against her, divide her community, and force her to confront the very prejudices she never knew she carried. Before we dive into this shocking tale, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories like this one. Because what happened next will make you question everything you think you know about privilege, justice, and the price of prejudice in modern America. Margaret Chen stood at her kitchen window, admiring the perfectly manicured lawns of Willowbrook Estates, the most exclusive gated community in Phoenix. Each house was worth at least $3 million. Each family carefully vetted by the homeowners association she helped establish 15 years ago. Everything was exactly as it should be, until she saw him. A tall black man in his 20s was standing in the Hendersons' front yard, looking around as if he was casing the place. Margaret's blood ran cold. The Hendersons were in Europe for the month. She'd been keeping an eye on their property, and this stranger definitely didn't belong. "Not in my neighborhood," she whispered, reaching for her phone. Margaret had built her fortune in real estate by trusting her instincts, and every instinct screamed danger. She'd heard the stories, break-ins in gated communities, criminals targeting wealthy neighborhoods when residents were away. Her own home was worth $12 million, filled with priceless art and jewelry. She couldn't take any chances. The man moved toward the front door, and Margaret's heart raced. He was definitely planning something. Without hesitation, she dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" "There's a suspicious black male at 147 Maple Drive in Willowbrook Estates. The homeowners are out of the country, and he's clearly planning to break in. He looks dangerous." "Ma'am, can you describe what he's doing exactly?" Margaret watched as the man pulled something from his pocket. Probably lock-picking tools. "He's trying to get into the house. Please hurry. I think he's armed." The dispatcher assured her units were on the way. Margaret felt a surge of satisfaction. She was protecting her community, keeping everyone safe. This was what good neighbors did. But as she watched the man more closely, something nagged at her. There was something familiar about his posture, the way he carried himself. Where had she seen that confident military bearing before? Her son Jake's voice echoed from the living room. "Mom, is Marcus here yet? We're supposed to meet up before the game." "Marcus?" Margaret's stomach dropped. Marcus Williams, Jake's best friend since college. The one who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. The one Jake had invited to stay in the guest house while he looked for an apartment in Phoenix. The same Marcus who had a key to the Henderson house because he was house-sitting while they were away. Margaret's phone slipped from her trembling fingers as the reality hit her like a sledgehammer. She hadn't called the police on a burglar. She'd called them on her son's best friend. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer by the second. Margaret stood frozen at her window, watching Marcus Williams, decorated Marine veteran, honor graduate, the man who'd saved her son's life during a hiking accident 2 years ago, water the Hendersons' plants with a key clearly visible in his other hand. How had she been so wrong? How had 15 years of building relationships with neighbors, of pride in her community leadership, led to this moment of devastating misjudgment? The first patrol car screeched into the driveway with lights blazing. Then, another. And another. Margaret watched in horror as 4 officers jumped out, hands on their weapons, shouting commands at Marcus. "Get on the ground! Hands where we can see them!" Marcus immediately raised his hands, the watering hose falling to the perfectly manicured lawn. Even from her window, Margaret could see his military training kick in. Calm, controlled, non-threatening. But the officers weren't taking any chances. "I live here temporarily," Marcus called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I have permission to be here. The keys are right in my hand. Save it. Face down, now. Margaret's legs gave out as she watched them force Marcus to the ground, his face pressed against the concrete driveway. The same driveway where he'd helped her carry groceries just last week. The same driveway where he'd patiently taught her 8-year-old nephew how to shoot basketball hoops. Jake burst into the kitchen. "Mom, what's all the noise?" He stopped dead when he saw the scene outside. His face went white, then red with rage. "What did you do?" he whispered. Margaret couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd set in motion.
Hey Mom, what did you do?
Jake screamed, running toward the front door. "Jake, wait." But he was already outside, racing across the street toward the Henderson house, where his best friend was being handcuffed, searched, and humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. Neighbors were emerging from their houses now. Mrs. Patterson with her phone out, recording. The Johnson family standing on their porch, whispering and pointing. Even old Mr. Rodriguez had come outside, shaking his head in disgust. Margaret realized with crushing clarity that this wasn't just about a mistaken 911 call anymore. This was about who belonged in their perfect neighborhood. And who didn't. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was watching Jake kneel beside Marcus, apologizing over and over, while officers held them both back. And knowing that her son would never look at her the same way again. The damage was done. The question was, could it ever be undone? He's a decorated veteran. He served our country. Jake's voice cracked as he tried to push past the officers restraining him. "That's my best friend. He lives here." Officer Martinez, the senior officer on scene, finally looked up from where Marcus remained handcuffed and prone on the driveway. "Son, I need you to calm down and step back." "Calm down? You have him face down like a criminal?" He was watering plants. Margaret forced herself to move, her legs shaking as she walked outside. Every step felt like walking through quicksand. 20 neighbors were now watching from their yards and doorways. She could feel their eyes, hear their whispers. "Officer, there's been a mistake," she called out, her voice barely audible. Officer Martinez looked at her sharply. "Ma'am, are you the one who called this in?" The words stuck in her throat. Around her, the whispers grew louder. Mrs. Patterson was still recording. The video would be on social media within minutes, shared thousands of times with captions about racial profiling in wealthy neighborhoods. Yes, but I didn't realize." "You didn't realize what, Mom?" Jake's voice cut through her like a blade. "That black people are allowed to exist in our neighborhood? That Marcus has been here dozens of times? That he's been nothing but respectful and kind to everyone here, including you?" Marcus, still face down with a knee in his back, spoke quietly. "Jake, it's okay, man. Let them do their job." "It's not okay." Jake turned to the gathering crowd. "This man served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He has more medals than most people have college degrees. And you're treating him like a common criminal because my mother made assumptions." Margaret felt the world spinning. She'd built her reputation in this community carefully over 15 years. She was on the HOA board, organized charity fundraisers, hosted elegant dinner parties. Now she was becoming the face of everything wrong with exclusive neighborhoods. But worse than her reputation, worse than the stares and whispers, was the look in her son's eyes. Pure disappointment. The kind that changes relationships forever. Officer Martinez finally helped Marcus to his feet and removed the handcuffs. "We're gonna need to see some identification and verify your right to be here." Marcus nodded calmly, pulling out his military ID, his driver's license, and the key the Hendersons had given him. "The homeowners are Thomas and Sarah Henderson. They're in Italy until the 15th. I have their contact information if you need to verify." As the officer made his calls, Margaret found herself face to face with Marcus for the first time since the ordeal began. She expected anger, rage, threats of lawsuits. Instead, she saw something worse. Profound sadness. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "I thought you knew me better than this." Those words hit harder than any accusation could have. Because he was right. She did know him better than this. So why had she made that call? The officers cleared the scene. 20 minutes later. But the real damage was just beginning. Margaret stood in her driveway watching neighbors slowly return to their houses, their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright disgust. Jake hadn't spoken to her since Marcus was released. Both young men had gone to Jake's apartment across town, leaving Margaret alone with the crushing weight of what she'd done. Her phone buzzed. A text from her neighbor, Patricia Johnson. Saw the video on Facebook. 50,000 shares already. This is not a good look for our community. Margaret. Video. Margaret's hands shook as she opened Facebook. There it was, a crystal clear recording of Marcus being forced to the ground, handcuffed, and searched while she stood in her doorway. The caption read, "Racist Karen calls police on black veteran watering plants in Phoenix gated community." The comments were brutal. This is exactly what's wrong with wealthy white neighborhoods. That man served our country, and this is how he gets treated? Someone needs to identify this woman and hold her accountable. Her phone rang. Margaret's heart sank when she saw the caller ID. Channel 12 News. Mrs. Chen, this is Rebecca Torres from Channel 12. We'd like to get your comment on the incident this afternoon involving the false police report against Marcus Williams. Margaret hung up without saying a word, but the phone immediately rang again. Channel 5, then Channel 7, then reporters she'd never heard of. By evening, news vans were parked outside the gated community. The Homeowners Association president called an emergency meeting. Margaret's real estate firm received dozens of angry calls and emails threatening boycotts. But the worst call came at 9 p.m. Mom. Jake's voice was cold, distant. Jake, honey, please let me explain. Explain what? That you saw my best friend and immediately assumed he was a criminal? That you never bothered to look closer or think for 2 seconds or even call me to ask? Margaret sank into her leather chair, the one where she'd hosted so many successful business meetings, where she'd celebrated closing million-dollar deals. Now it felt like a throne built on prejudice. I was scared. The house was supposed to be empty, and I saw someone I didn't recognize. You did recognize him, Mom. You just chose not to see him as human. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then Jake delivered the words that would haunt Margaret forever. Marcus asked me to tell you something. He said he understands that fear makes people do terrible things, but he thought you were different. He thought our family was different. Jake, I did too, Mom. I thought we were different. The line went dead. Margaret stared at her phone, then at her reflection in the dark window. For the first time in her life, she didn't recognize the person looking back at her. Who had she become? And more importantly, could she find her way back to who she wanted to be? Margaret woke to protesters outside the community gates. Not violent protesters, but organized demonstrators with signs reading "Justice for Marcus" and "Stop Racial Profiling." Local news crews interviewed residents leaving for work, asking for their thoughts on the incident. Her phone had 47 missed calls and over 200 text messages. Her email inbox had crashed from the volume. But worst of all, her son still wouldn't take her calls. At 8 a.m., her real estate partner, Diana, called with devastating news. Margaret, we need to talk. The Henderson family cut their vacation short. They're flying back today, and they're furious. Not at Marcus, at you. They trusted you to watch their neighborhood, and instead you nearly got their house sitter arrested. Margaret's stomach dropped. The Hendersons were clients, but more than that, they'd been friends for 8 years. Sarah Henderson had been one of her bridesmaids. There's more? Diana continued. The Riverside Heights project is in jeopardy. The investors saw the news coverage and they're reassessing their partnership with our firm. That's a $40 million deal, Margaret. The business she'd spent 20 years building was crumbling because of one phone call. One moment of prejudice that revealed something ugly she hadn't even known existed inside her. By noon, Margaret realized she had to face the music. She drove to Jake's apartment, parked outside, and waited. She'd wait all day if necessary. When Jake finally emerged at 2 p.m., he wasn't alone. Marcus was with him. Margaret got out of her car, her legs unsteady. Please, both of you. I need to say something. Marcus looked at Jake, who nodded reluctantly. They stood there on the sidewalk, traffic rushing past, while Margaret tried to find words for the inexcusable. Marcus, I don't have an excuse for what I did. I can't claim ignorance, or fear, or anything else that would make this okay. I saw a black man in my neighborhood and I made assumptions based on nothing but prejudice I didn't even know I carried. Marcus listened without expression. I've known you for 3 years. You've been nothing but respectful, kind, and honorable. You've protected my son, helped my family, and contributed to our community. And when it mattered most, I saw your skin color before I saw your character. Margaret's voice broke. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make this right. To be better. To do better. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice steady and dignified. Mrs. Chen, what hurts isn't just what you did. It's that you revealed how fragile acceptance really is. How quickly knowing someone can disappear when fear takes over. He paused, looking directly into her eyes. But here's what I learned in Afghanistan. People aren't defined by their worst moments. They're defined by what they do after those moments. The question hanging in the air was clear. What would Margaret Chen do next? Margaret's journey back from rock bottom began with a single phone call, not to her lawyer, not to a PR firm, but to the local chapter of the NAACP. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm the woman from the video. I want to do more than apologize. I want to learn, and I want to help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The chapter president, Dr. Angela Washington, was skeptical but intrigued. Mrs. Chen, we get calls like this after every viral incident. People want to make it right, until the media attention dies down. What makes you different? Honestly, nothing yet. But I'm hoping you'll help me become different. That conversation led to Margaret volunteering at community centers, attending racial equity workshops, and most importantly, listening to stories from people who'd experienced what Marcus had experienced, or worse. Meanwhile, the legal consequences mounted. The city launched an investigation into misuse of emergency services. The Homeowners Association faced a discrimination lawsuit. Margaret's real estate firm was hemorrhaging clients. But something unexpected happened during Margaret's third week of community service. While helping serve meals at a homeless shelter, she met Jerome, a 19-year-old black college student who'd been wrongfully arrested the previous year in a case of mistaken identity. The difference between you and most people, Jerome told her, is that you're here. You're showing up even when the cameras are gone. That conversation sparked an idea. Margaret used her business connections and her own money to establish the Second Look Foundation, an organization dedicated to training law enforcement and community members on implicit bias and racial profiling prevention. The foundation's first major initiative was partnering with the Phoenix Police Department to revise their response protocols for suspicious person calls in affluent neighborhoods. Margaret's humiliation became the catalyst for systemic change. But the person she most wanted to reach remained distant. Jake had agreed to family therapy, but their relationship was still strained. He saw her efforts as genuine but questioned whether they were enough. The test came 6 months later, when Margaret received a call from Marcus. Mrs. Chen, I have a favor to ask. My younger brother is starting college at ASU, and he needs a place to stay while he looks for housing. Jake suggested he could stay in your guest house for a few weeks. Margaret's heart pounded. This was Marcus extending an olive branch, testing whether her changes were real or performative. Of course, she said without hesitation. He's welcome as long as he needs. 2 weeks later, David Williams moved into Margaret's guest house. He was quiet, studious, and initially wary of her. But slowly, over shared meals and conversations about his pre-med studies, something shifted. Margaret began to see David not as Marcus's brother or the black kid in her guest house, but simply as David, a brilliant young man with dreams of becoming a pediatric surgeon. The morning David left for his dorm, he hugged Margaret goodbye. Thank you for seeing me, he said simply. Margaret understood. He wasn't thanking her for housing. He was thanking her for truly seeing him as an individual from day one. But the biggest breakthrough was still to come. A year after the incident, Margaret received an invitation that stopped her cold. Marcus Williams was getting married, and Jake wanted her to attend the ceremony. Margaret stared at the elegant invitation, her hands trembling. After everything that had happened, after the humiliation she'd caused Marcus, he was willing to have her at his wedding? The ceremony was beautiful. Marcus in his dress blues, his bride radiant in ivory silk. Margaret sat in the back, trying to make herself invisible, still carrying the weight of shame despite all her efforts to change. But during the reception, Marcus approached her table. Mrs. Chen, can we talk? He led her to a quiet corner of the venue. Margaret braced herself for whatever he needed to say. "I want to thank you," he said quietly. Margaret was stunned. "Thank me? Marcus? Let me finish. What you did that day was wrong. It was hurtful and dangerous and rooted in prejudice. But what you did afterward, the real work, the foundation, the changes you made in yourself and in our community, that matters too." He paused, looking across the room at his new wife laughing with Jake. "My wife is a teacher. She works in a school district that now has bias training because of your foundation. My brother felt safe in your home because you had done the work to examine your own prejudices. That police department has new protocols that might prevent another family from going through what we went through." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not saying we're even, or that what happened is okay," Marcus continued, "but I am saying that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most important changes. You chose to let that day transform you instead of destroy you." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Jake dance with Marcus's sister. "There's something else," Marcus said. "Jake and I are starting a consulting firm, helping businesses and communities address implicit bias. We want you to be our first board member." Margaret looked at him in shock. "You want me to? I want you to use your influence, your connections, and your story to help others avoid making the mistakes you made. Turn your shame into service." That night, driving home from the wedding, Margaret called Jake. "Son, I want you to know that I'm still learning, still working to be better. But watching you and Marcus tonight, seeing the men you've both become despite what I put you through, I've never been prouder or more sorry at the same time." "Mom," Jake said quietly, "Marcus taught me something about forgiveness. It's not about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to build something better from the pieces." "I love you, Jake." "I love you too, Mom, and I'm ready to build something better together." As Margaret pulled into her driveway in Willowbrook Estates, the same driveway where Marcus had been handcuffed a year earlier, she saw a young black family moving into the Henderson house. She grabbed a bottle of wine and walked across the street to introduce herself. Not as the neighborhood watch, not as the HOA enforcer, just as a neighbor, welcoming them home. 2 years later, Margaret Chen stood before a packed auditorium at Phoenix City Hall, addressing a crowd gathered for the Second Look Foundation's annual conference on community policing and bias prevention. "My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm a recovering racist." The room was silent. 2 years ago, I made a phone call that nearly destroyed my family, humiliated a decorated veteran, and exposed the ugly truth about privilege and prejudice in America. I called 911 on my son's best friend because I saw a black man in my neighborhood and assumed he was a criminal. Margaret looked out at the diverse crowd, police officers, community leaders, residents from across Phoenix, and in the front row, Marcus and Jake, now successful business partners. I could have spent the rest of my life making excuses. I could have retreated into shame and defensiveness. Instead, I chose to let that moment teach me something I should have learned long ago. That true acceptance isn't about tolerating people who are different from you. It's about examining the biases you don't even know you carry. The foundation had trained over 5,000 law enforcement officers, implemented bias prevention programs in 2,000 schools, and helped establish new protocols in police departments across 3 states. But Margaret's proudest achievement was simpler and more personal. Last month, my son Jake called to tell me he's engaged. He's marrying a wonderful woman named Keisha, who happens to be black. When he told me, my first thought wasn't about her race. It was about whether she makes him happy, whether she's kind to him, whether she'll be a good addition to our family. Margaret paused, her voice getting stronger. That might not sound like a victory to you, but for someone who once saw skin color before humanity, it represents a fundamental change in how I see the world. She looked directly at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. I can't undo the harm I caused. I can't take back the fear and humiliation Marcus Williams experienced on his friend's front lawn. But I can use my privilege, my platform, and my story to make sure fewer people have to experience what he did. Margaret concluded with words that had become the foundation's motto. We are not defined by our worst moments. We are defined by what we choose to do after those moments. Today, I choose to keep learning. I choose to keep growing. And I choose to keep fighting for a community where everyone is truly welcome. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. But what mattered more to Margaret was the brief hug Marcus gave her afterward. Not the hug of forgiveness, but the hug of mutual respect between two people who had transformed pain into purpose. As she drove home to Willowbrook Estates, now one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Phoenix thanks to the Foundation's housing equity initiatives, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The billionaire in her designer house had learned something money couldn't buy. That true wealth comes from seeing the humanity in everyone you meet. And sometimes, the most important lessons come from our most shameful moments, if we're brave enough to learn from them. In her rear-view mirror, she saw Marcus's car pulling into his new driveway 3 houses down from hers. He waved, and she waved back. Neighbors, friends, family, just as it should be.